Hey everyone, welcome back to Bible Bits. Today we are finishing off Genesis 12 and seeing where Abraham and Sarah, or Abram and Sarai in the story, go from Abraham's initial calling. So we're going to start right in verse 10. It's a little bit of a longer reading, so bear with me. Starting in verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, This is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abraham entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. Basically a lot of gifts. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, She is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. A longer reading, but a very important one. The interesting thing about this section of Scripture, I think, is, one, God never condones what Abraham does here. Abraham pretty clearly shows a lack of faith in God in this story. He goes in there and he says, I'm afraid of what Pharaoh is going to do to me, so Sarah, pretend you're my wife, or you're my sister. Pretend you're my sister, because if I say you're my wife, they're going to kill me, so that then they can take you as one of their wives. And presumably this fear was justified, because clearly the Pharaoh and the princes of Egypt, they saw Sarah, and they said, good-looking woman, let's take her and make her the wife of the Pharaoh. So clearly Abraham's fear was correct in the general sense, but at the same time, Abraham clearly does not trust God the way he ought to trust God. He's already shown a good deal of trust in God by leaving his home and going to a land he doesn't know. But here, he's done what will become a consistent theme throughout the rest of Scripture, especially with the Israelites. When the Israelites are in trouble, they tend to go to Egypt for some reason. I'm honestly not sure why. Egypt, of course it should be said, was in that day a very powerful nation, even up until late in the history of Israel. Egypt owned a lot of land. They had a pretty fertile land. Egypt was a good place to be. And Egypt did have a certain amount of power, but it is strange that almost every time Israel was in trouble, their first place to look was Egypt. Of course, Joseph and his brothers would end up in Egypt. Israel would be in Egypt for a very long time. Egypt would be a common refrain. Even Jesus, when he's born and they're having to hide from this command that's given out to kill all the children who are under the age of a certain age, 2, I think, they flee to Egypt. Now, of course, that one was to fulfill a biblical prophecy, but still, it's very strange that every time there seems to be trouble with Israel, they turn to Egypt, and Abraham is the first one to do so. He turns to Egypt when things are going wrong, in this case, a famine in the land. But when he gets there, he shows a lack of faith in God by, instead of trusting God to keep him safe, saying, pretend you're my sister, because odds are they're going to want you, and if they do, they're going to kill me. Again, Abraham seems to have been correct in that. They probably would have tried to kill him. But he should have trusted God. And here I think we see a good example for us in Scripture that the men and women that we consider heroes of the faith, that is, people who did amazing things in the Bible, who showed a great trust in God, who followed God's plans, who loved Him and followed Him to the best of their ability, they were flawed human beings. They were not perfect people. Abraham, the father of Israel, the founder of a nation, and really the one through whom Jesus would come, he wasn't a perfect guy. In fact, he had his own struggles. Yeah, we don't see a ton of Abraham's foibles throughout the Scripture. Abraham comes off pretty well throughout. He doesn't get the treatment of, say, a David, where we see all the dirty laundry displayed. But Abraham was not a perfect guy. The reason I bring it up is because oftentimes we can feel in our own lives that when we're imperfect, when we're failing to live up to a particular standard of holiness, that somehow God can no longer use us. We screwed up. We didn't do something the way it was supposed to be done. I failed here. I failed there. Therefore, God cannot use me. I've taken myself out of contention. I've moved myself away from God's plan, and therefore, God doesn't want to deal with me anymore. But that's not the case. Now, certainly God was not approving of what Abraham does here. Nowhere in this story do we see God saying, "Good job, Abraham. Way to lie to people. Way to mistreat your wife and treat her like an object and not like a human being." God doesn't say any of that. But God does rectify the situation. Why? Because God had made a promise to Abraham. Not the other way around. God had made a promise to Abraham, and God would fulfill that promise. You know, God has made a promise to you and me. The covenant we entered through the blood of Christ is a promise that He will take care of us, that He will see us through hard times, that He will bring us to a place of good, and that He can use us for His purpose. That promise is not really reliant on us being perfect. It's just reliant on us following Him. Abraham screwed up. This won't be the last time Abraham screws up. In fact, Abraham will try this very trick later on down the line. He doesn't seem to learn his lesson. But nowhere does God disqualify Abraham because he is a fallen human being. Just like He doesn't disqualify David. Just like He didn't disqualify Noah, even though Noah himself had an issue apparently with being drunk. He doesn't disqualify anyone down the line because they're human. All He asked was, "Follow me." Sometimes we make that too hard. We look at ourselves, we look in the mirror and we see every scar, we see every wound, and we think, God can't use this. God can't possibly take this broken shell and use it for something great. But He can, because it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about Him and His plan and His power. God will remain true to His promise. Doesn't mean we won't have to pay for our misdeeds. Abraham does indeed have to pay for some of his misdeeds through life. But it does mean that through it all, God will lead us where He needs us to go, as long as we get back up and follow Him. Abraham, after this, he would get back up and follow God. He would stumble again. But every time, just like David, just like Solomon, just like Elijah, just like Isaiah, every time they stumbled, they'd get back up and they'd follow God. And that was why God considered them faithful. Not because they were perfect, but because they got up and followed. That's all He's asking of you. He's not asking you to be perfect. All those commands in Scripture, He's not asking you to meet them perfectly. He's asking you to get back up and follow. And He will use you for His purpose. That's all we have here today. I hope this has been beneficial to you. We'll continue in Genesis 13 next week. Until then, see you later, everybody.